Don't you love the young leadership here? Don't you love the young leadership here? Wow. Dude, man, I'll tell you, there are churches in America who would love to take some of these young leaders. You have quality leadership here. I mean that. Sometimes we can take for granted the kind of staff you have. And man, I'm telling you, if I were you, I'd keep them. Because if I were at another church, I'd be trying to get them. If I were a pastor, I'd be like, hello, could you pray about? Dude, this is some great leadership here. And that's a testament to Pastor James and his vision and what he wants to see happen in this place too, right? I know over the few years that I've known this church, you're in transitions and you probably feel like Israel and you're going through the wilderness and it's like, where's the tent going to be set up next week, whatever, but that's all right. Some of the fastest growing churches in America are going through exactly what you're going through right now. So I want to thank Pastor James for being on vacation. And I have to work today. But that's cool. Go to Job, the book of Job, chapter 1. And I want to deal with some mindsets, a mindset that has to change today in the church, in the American church. How many of you believe that God can work supernaturally today in your life? I know it, I've seen it, and not just heard it, right? And in order for that kind of God to show up in your life, mindsets have to be broke. There are things that get in the way of an American church. There are things that get in the way in our mindset, in our assumptions, in our thinking that have to be destroyed. Whether you see that or not, this morning it's my prayer that things will be broken in the stronghold of your mind so that God can be who he really is in your own personal life. Okay? If you look at the church globally, the church is growing on every continent except for North America. Central America, the church is exploding. South America, there are healing crusades that are going on that are mind-blowing. If you look at the continent of Africa, you see crusades with millions of people in one crusade. It'll stretch out over 3 or 4 days, and there'll be 2+ million people listening to the gospel and being prayed for the supernatural. If you look at the underground church in China or the underground church in the East, you see an exploding church. Under oppression, you see an exploding church. Then you look at America and you see the confidence of Americans and you see the influence and the wealth right? And you see the mindset that we have and you wonder, Central American church, South American church, African church, Asian church, exploding. We have more resources, we have more stuff, more confidence, and the church is shrinking. The average church in America in 2014, the average church in America grew by 1 person. That's not acceptable. And I think a lot of this has to do with mindset changes. I want to talk to you this morning about a message entitled, My Broken Palace. my broken palace. You know, oftentimes in America, we have this idea that everything's perfect. Everything's in order. This is how I want it to be. And if anything is shifted or if anything gets knocked off center, then that entitled mindset shows up. And that elitism shows up. And we say things like, you could probably finish these statements. We say things like, this isn't fair. I never thought this would happen to me. I don't deserve this, right? I could say those statements in some parts of the world and they wouldn't even know what I'm talking about. Because there's not this elitist mentality. There's not this possessiveness, right? This I'm owed. Gimme, my name is Jimmy. Right? And I think if God could just shift some things in our thinking, we would see the kingdom at such a more rapid rate in America than we're seeing today. Oftentimes in Christ's relationship with people, he would challenge their thinking. He said, I don't know if you remember the story of the centurion, this leading strategist of the Roman guard, okay? Jesus is talking to him and he says, you know, my servant is dead. My servant is dead. And Jesus says, do you believe? Centurion says, I'm a man under oath and I'm a man under honor. I'm a man under rank. All you'd have to do is say the word and my servant will be fine. And Jesus looks around and literally this is what Jesus says. Can you believe this? You look at can you believe this? This is the kind of faith that my kingdom is run from. And you know, he says the word, just go check on your servant, right? And the centurion, who's head of guards, knows exactly what just happened. And we struggle with his presence in our life on a regular basis because of assumptions and mindsets and thinking. Let's pick it up in Job. You know most of the story. I'll fill in for some of you maybe who are guests or you're real familiar with the story of Job. Look at verse 6. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came amongst them. Did you catch that? That probably is a whole another theological question to deal with, but let's scoot on past that. And the Lord said to Satan, where do you come from? So Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the whole earth and from walking back and forth on it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man, one who fears God and shuns evil? So Satan answered the Lord and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now, if you would just stretch out your hand, touch all that he has, he will surely curse you to your face, right? And you get this accusation against Job, and that the only reason he is righteous is because God is protecting him. The Lord isn't finished. The Lord said to Satan, verse 12, behold, everything that he has is in your power. Isn't it an interesting thought that that God, with all the power in the universe, relinquishes some power to Satan? And yet most of us think differently. We think God's got some power, but what's going on in my life, he can't deal with. When all he did is just give up a little. He just gets some. You can have some. You can have this much. You understand that? God will only allow so much to come to your life. But what happens is we get a little oppression, we get a little difficulty, and we start saying things like those phrases we just said. This isn't, and then we remove God from the equation because of our assumptions. And the Lord just says to Satan, listen, you can have some power, but do not touch his person. Do not touch his soul. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. And you know what happens in these next few verses. For those of you that know what happens, he loses everything. He loses his family. He loses his servants. He loses his cattle and livestock and possessions. He loses everything. Everything that is external to him, it's gone. And people are watching this. And the community, I'm sure, is watching this of people around Job. And in verse 22 at the end of the chapter, this is what he says. In all of this, the scriptures say, Job did not sin nor charge God with wrong. Right? Now, this is only the first half of the story. I'm not even going to get to the second half. We know that Satan goes back again, says to God, okay, listen, man, listen, the only reason he hasn't cursed you is because you're still protecting him. And God's like, dude, haven't you gotten this yet? And he says, let me touch his body, right? In the chapter 2, let me touch his body. I got him now, right? Okay, that didn't work. All right, that's pretty good, Lord. You gave me some. Give me a little more. Let me touch his body, and I'll show you he will curse you to your face. And the Lord says the same thing again. He's like, go ahead. But you can't touch his soul. He loses his health in the next few days, and to the point of self-harm and cutting. Listen, I don't know what you're going through in this place today, but I'll lay your story next to Job's and ask you for the same response. I don't think anybody in here wants to sit at Job's table in heaven and complain about pressure, sickness, difficulty. Oh, but you don't know my story. No, I don't, but I know his. And I know who finished the story. You know, the last thing you want to do is show up in heaven, sit down at Job or Paul's table and be like, man, it was rough. Come on. Yeah, you know, the people at work, dude, they were calling me a Christian, man. They were like persecuting me. I mean, Paul would probably just get up and go choose another table. And so you finish this story, the second part, and the attack, and all the stuff that, and his wife, his spouse, Job's spouse attacks him, right? All this pressure from the outside. What is your response at the point of need? Some of you are going through difficulty right now. I know that. You're going through, I'm not here to minimize your difficulty. But what I want to do is to challenge your thinking. Hans Teffel is one of the great theologians of our day. Most of you have never heard that name. He speaks often at universities around the world. Hans Teffel. You can Google him and find out this. One of the great statements he has made is this. Many believers don't realize the difference between Western thinking and Christian thinking. You see, we have our mindset so set up in the West that we listen to culture versus scripture. Does somebody hear that? Listen, if you talk back at me, it won't get longer. It'll just be better. All right? I grew up in a very Pastor James said to me, man, 30% of my church is diverse. I grew up in a setting way more diverse than that. So bring it to me a little bit, right? Right? And it's okay. It won't get longer. It'll just be better for you. Wake you, right? I had a sister shouting me straight down this morning. Listen, many believers don't realize the difference between Western thinking and Christian thinking because we spend more time worried about our culture than we do our scriptures. Hear me, we got to challenge that kind of thinking today. Most of us think hardship, where's honor in hardship? Most of us think chaos. Listen, God works his best. God lays out a canvas and finishes our chaos. Most of us think mess. My life is a mess. Where's his message in that? Most of us will say, no, tragedy? You want to hear tragedy? I got a story for you. And we throw our tragedy in God's face, not even thinking that he can bring triumph out of it. When I look at what God has been doing in certain parts of the world, I desire it for America so bad. But we've got to shift some thinking. You know, I believe one of the things that we're stuck with when it comes to thinking in pillars in the Western church is materialism. Comfort and ease. And that's got to be broken because there are some things we say we really don't mean. God challenged me in my thinking over a year ago, back in the spring, about 16 months ago. God challenged me in my thinking. I had placed my family before the Lord. I had raised my family up above everything else in my life. And I know sometimes in our Western thinking, that's good. Man, it's all about the family. I mean, the family first. Family first. Ministry center, right? And I was so prideful in my family and so excited about my family. And God woke me up in the middle of the morning. I wish God spoke in the afternoon. I'd listen to him more, but he woke me up in the middle of the morning. It was 3:30-ish in the morning. I'll never forget it. It was a conversation that changed my life. And I remember being awakened to his presence in the room. And he said to me, I will not have your family before me. And I remember thinking, this is bad. You know, this is bad food the night before. God wouldn't say that. It's these assumptions. It's Western think. God would never say that. He loves the family. He wants me to love and place my family first, right? And I remember him saying, I will not have your family before me. I am a jealous God. I shook myself awake, and I'm thinking that through, and I began to throw back at God. Well, listen, I love you too, but don't you want me to have a healthy family? I've never placed the family before ministry. I've never done that. And I felt the Lord again. He said it to me so clearly after I had thrown arguments back to him. Parenthetically, think of the relationship between Job and God when he sent arguments back, right? We don't have time to go there, but I send these arguments back, and God just shakes his head at me again. After about a half an hour of just going back and forth in my mind, I don't think I'm doing that. And the Lord said to me again, just as clear as I'm speaking to you, as clear as a daydream, he said to me, I will not have your family before me. I didn't know what else to do. I was shaken, and I woke my wife up. Don't do that, fellas. Keep it to you and God, right? I just remember waking her up and her thinking, what do you do? What? Hello? And I said, honey, you won't believe tell me in the morning over, breakfast or something. And she's the realist, I'm the dream, right? So that relation, it's 4:00 in the morning now. And I said to her, the Lord just told me that I've placed our family before him. And we sat there and prayed that thought through. And God had been speaking to her also. And we prayed this through. I remember giving this is 16 months ago. We've been married 31 years in August. And I remember giving my wife back to God, saying, honey, he's central. I think we knew that, but we didn't act that way sometimes. And there was this limitation, there was this lid, this ceiling that God wanted to deal with in my thinking before he could do something that was about to happen in my family. And he's going through the same thing. Job is going through the same conversation when everything is stripped from him. And now he's back and forth. If you read 37, at the end of the story, 37 through 42, there's all of these questions in this relationship. And God keeps challenging Job in his thinking. And I can remember from that time forward, we had spent an hour up in bed crying. And I called my family together. I called my 3 kids together, and two of them, one was married at the time, the other was engaged. I called our whole family together that week, and I sat them down, and in tears, I gave them up. I said, I've placed you before God, and I remember telling them, I've been a bad example. I want you to know, God will not have mom, and I went down through each of my kids, or any of you, before he is jealous for me, and I'm sorry. In that time, days, weeks that happened, I didn't know what was about to hit our family. I didn't know that walking into August of last year now, which was about 3 months after that, after the Lord had been speaking to me, that we'd be at my daughter's wedding, right? My daughter's wedding, August 23rd, and my wife would begin to experience a sickness. She said to me about halfway through that Saturday, we had the whole week of planning. We're at the church. We're going through the wedding, the pictures, and everything else that comes with it. And she comes over to me and she says, "Honey, I've got these bruises on me." And she had about 8 or 10 bruises on her that morning and into the early afternoon. And I said, it's stress. It's just, never say that to your wife on a wedding day. Don't wake her up in the middle and tell her your dream with God, and don't tell her it's stress at a wedding time, right? We could go into marriage counseling right now if we want. Fellas, please listen this morning. And I remember thinking in that moment, this is okay. This is no big deal. I think, again, it's this assumption, this Western thinking. We'll take a couple aspirin, right? Monday we'll go take you in and get some tests. Throughout that afternoon, the wedding is completed, and we're at the dinner that evening. And now my wife has about 20 plus bruises all over her body. One of them is large as her whole left hand and upper forearm. I mean, just huge bruises. And I'm like, and people began to notice it and, said some things. And Jane just, hey, to hear your wife say, it's just stress, I was like, see, I was right. The first time, that's what I said. And we're just trying to calm people. That evening, we're at the dinner reception, and everything's done. People are gone, and my daughter Jory and Luke, they're gone. They leave for the honeymoon, and we're cleaning up. And Jane sits down and she says, I can't go on. I said, let's go home. We get in the car. She's in her mother of the bride dress and high heels, and I've got my suit on. And we left our family to pack everything up and finish. And we're driving home. I'm going to take her home. And she says, honey, I got to go to the emergency room. I said, listen, we'll go Monday. Let's just go rest. We just need to rest. We'll go Monday morning. And we get closer to home, and we have a decision to make, to pull off to the loft or to go home. We live right downtown, to go to the emergency room. And she said one more time, I really need to be checked. We go down to the emergency. We check in. And my wife is there for the next 16 days. See, what we didn't know was that we were being attacked. My wife had not been sick. My wife had shown no signs of illness until this moment, this Saturday, in a course of hours. The tests come back, and the doctor who's on duty there, who in a long series of miracles is never there. The doctor that is still with us on our oncology team is still with us, is never there, and was there that evening. And she was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic melanoma. And not only that, she had what is called DIC, deficiency in coagulation. She could not stop bleeding internally. And when we heard those words, I remember thinking, the first thing I thought to myself was, hold it, where's stage 1, 2, and 3? Why couldn't we deal with, right? And the doctors began to talk us through this, and in a long story that we just don't have the time for this morning. This came upon so fast. Normally with melanoma, if you know anything about it, it's lesion-based. It is lesion-based, and you have it, and you take this out, then the lymph nodes out, and then you take that out, and if it gets worse, especially if it's metastatic melanoma, it's already spread through the body. She skipped all the stages and was attacked with this blood disorder at the same time. We believe through several relationships and words and people that we were being attacked. And if I could fill in the other stories that were going on in our family, within that same year, you would say the same thing. Sunday afternoon, they come back, they tell us this is what it is. And the doctor says to us, man, I'm so glad that you came in right away, because Jane would not have lived to Monday morning. As a matter of fact, she has 3 to 6 months to live. Right? Not 6 years, 4 years, 3 years, not a year, 3 to 6 months to live. And I'm thinking, like maybe some of you too, this isn't fair. Why me? Lord, you just told me to put my family before you. Now you're going to take my wife? And in these moments, I'm struggling with my humanity in this story. I don't even know the end of the story. And I remember thinking to myself, in the first few days of this stage in the hospital, writing the story. God, we're gonna do this, and then people are gonna see us strong. The university where I work said to me, "Why don't you take the year off? Why don't you just take the year off and spend time with your wife?" And I said, "Hold it. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not gonna take the year off and spend time with my wife. My wife is not gonna die." You understand? I'm saying to the beast, my wife is not going to die. My wife is laying in bed a few days into this in the intensive care, and I'm in the chair, and she leans over and she looks at me and she says, "Is this really happening?" My youngest son says to the family, "This is not of death. She's not going to die of this." My daughter comes a week later, a few days, 8 or 9 days later, comes back from the honeymoon. We couldn't even tell her on her honeymoon what was going on. She comes back and she walks into the room. If you know my daughter, you can picture this real quick. She walks into the room and took the room over. And she looked at her mom and she looked at each of us, tears streaming down her face, and she said, "This is not of death. You are not." She called my wife right out of bed. Called her right out of bed. And would not, when your children start ministering, See, listen, young people, everything that mom and dad is teaching you, there's a reason. And why do I got to come to church again one more time, man? Shut up and keep coming. Because there's going to be a time when you need it. Mom and dad, you got to give me more than that right now. You got to hit that kid next to you or something. And to see my children rise up and deal with hardship better than I was at the time. Listen, I don't know what you're going through, but God is with you. God is, Isaiah 43 verses 1 through 3 says this: when you go through the waters, I will be with you. And when the rivers rise up, they will not overflow you. And when you walk through the fire, I will be there. You won't even be burnt. You won't even smell like somebody. Remember Daniel and the three boys, his little posse that got thrown in, right? They get thrown into the lion's den. And they starve these lions, and they put extra lions in. And they throw Daniel in there, right? And he's like, as soon as he hits, he's thinking, I'm going to get snapped. And it's like, here, kitty, kitty. In the furnace. Some of you have never been thrown into a lion's den. You've never been put in a furnace. Paul, whom many people have said, C.S. Lewis, who is one of the great theologians to ever live, called Paul the greatest Christian to live. The church was built upon Peter and Paul. Paul wrote half the New Testament. He begged God for deliverance from an illness. And the Lord said, my grace is sufficient for you. Let me tell you something. His grace and his presence is way better than the pain. Some of you see the story of Job and you see pain and you see loss. When I read the story of Job, after having gone through what I've gone through, I don't see pain and I don't see loss. I see presence and gain. It's just mindsets that have to change because it's not fair and it shouldn't happen to me. And why? Listen, change your Western thinking, get out of the culture, into the scripture, and you'll think better. You'll be able to sit at the table with Job. You'll be able to sit at the table with Paul and have discussions with them and them not get up and leave. See, all through scriptures, we see stories of God interrupting lives and changing the end of the story. I remember when we were going through this, the Lord said to me, are you going to give me the pen in your hand? Give me the pen in your hand. This is not your story. This is mine. You're not going to write it. I am. I remember getting a pen and setting it down. And I told Jane the same thing. I don't know if we're writing something, we got to stop. We got to stop right now and give it to him. Let him finish it. Mindset, assumptions that had to change. Because, man, right? I want to control. I got my family on this. Come on, bring it, let's go. I'm going to control. And the Lord's saying, don't do that. You give me this and watch. Just watch. See, I know the end of the story, and a few of you do, but. And so we get Jane home after 16 days in the hospital. She's started the chemo. She's losing her hair and going through this whole process. And I said to our doctor, I have a grandbaby to be born December 18. Is my wife going to hold my grandchild? And my doctor took his glasses off in the hallway of the hospital right before we left and said, I can't guarantee that. That was just 3 to 4 months away. We get Jane home, and the Lord had put on our heart to call students around us to fast and pray and to come over and anoint Jane and to lay hands on her. We've been in youth ministry. This is our 31st year in youth ministry, and we wanted students to minister to us. We had spent our life ministering to students, and it was time for them to minister to us. And I remember thinking, listen, it's not easy as a minister. It's not easy as an elder to let people minister to you. I've been on the other side ministering to people all the time. And now it's like God's saying, listen, here's another mindset. I'm going to blow. You're not going to do it. Don't you put your hands on your wife tonight. I remember praying for the kids and laying hands on them because the Lord spoke to me. They're going to minister to your wife. Mindsets, assumptions. That night, the students came over. I'd asked them for 1 week to fast and to pray and get words and to bring words into that meeting on that Sunday night. Wait, were you there? I think you were there, right? Yeah. And these students came in, and it was beautiful. Now, we do believe that the Lord began healing Jane before that. We know it. We felt it. And even though Jane was still weak and she was going through the treatment, this was not of death. But we truly believe that God was doing something that Sunday night through the students. And things began to turn. That just shortly after that, we had a test, a critical test of her bone marrow. See, the stage 4 metastatic melanoma, as I said, was not lesion-based. It went blood-borne. Our doctors told us they've only seen 1 or 2 cases like this. And we had one of the top oncology teams in the country. They sent her setting, for those of you that are doctors or nurses, they sent her setting, all her tests, to different, Portland, Dallas, oncology, different places. And people were writing back, we're watching this case. We want to see what you decide to do. That's what they told us. Our doctors through this whole course said, we are writing an article for the New England Journal of Medicine because we've never seen this case. DIC, stage 4 metastatic melanoma. It was an attack. Do you understand? This was an attack. And God is trying to change my mindset through this whole thing. And as we come out of that prayer meeting, we are faced with a test, a major test. They can only do every 6 to 8 weeks spinal taps of your bone marrow. And they had done one in the hospital, and my wife had 71% melanoma in her bone marrow. Incomprehensible. You can't even do a bone marrow transplant with that. It would kill you. They'd seen worse cases in the 50s. They've never seen 71%. Bone cellularity. I read the test. Bone cellularity, melanoma, 71%. This is catastrophic. Right? And yet walking into this, I wish you could see. I've said to many friends, I wish I would have videotaped my wife, because I would come home and she would be walking through the loft where we live downtown. She'd be walking through, quoting scriptures, her name inserted in the middle of it, just stomping down. And I walk in the middle of a prayer meeting of one. I would go to bed. I went to bed one evening, and Jane goes to sleep before. She's sleeping, and she's laying there, and her iPad is on her, and Reinhard Bonnke is preaching to the masses in Africa on healing. This is my wife, right? And she's crashed. She fell asleep listening to him. I pick up the iPad. I listen to the rest of it, set it down, lay hands on her again, and pray for her. This is the kind. We weren't ready for a funeral. I wasn't taking a year off work. I said to Jane, we are going to model and show these students how to go through hardship. That God is the same in the blessing as he is in the difficulty. I heard that. Okay, but can you put it to test? Will you put it to test? We get these tests back, and the doctor on the phone, Jane's talking to the doctor, I'm across the room going, come on, what's going on, right? And she's like, her face is lit up, and she turns to me and she goes, you gotta hear. Conversation, hangs the phone up, and she looks at me and she says, 0%. I have 0%. The doctor just told me my blood is like the blood of a woman who never had cancer. 0%. That's just the beginning. Just the beginning. They didn't even know what, our next meeting, they're like, do we stay with the chemo? Do we keep doing, we said to our doctor, just keep going. We'll just keep going here. We'll pray about it. I talked to leaders in my life. So we kept it going for a little bit. But the doctor said to us, I'm telling you, this is not chemo-based healing. The chemo didn't do this. Because the chemo doesn't work 71% to 0% in 6 weeks. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. And so we're going through that. We are tested every month after that. We had a test just 2 weeks ago. Last week. And I've been to every, I think I missed one time when I was out of town in the 10 months we were doing this. I went to everything. I would leave school, leave work just to be with her. I didn't even go to the last one because every test has been the same. We go in, pick up a magazine, they come out, you're healed. There's no zero. Not 1%, not 12%, 0. My doctor said to us one time, in one of the meetings, we really want to keep this going for maintenance. Maintenance. I said, and this is exactly what I said, because I have a great relationship with our doctors. They know I'm a preacher. I said, why do we have to do maintenance on 0? This comes back. What comes back? What comes? I said this. What comes back? Mindsets. I don't care if something comes back. I'll deal with it the same way I dealt with the first one. With his faith and his power and his sovereignty. Will you stand this morning, please?